VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at VCYAmerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Very interesting day indeed as white smoke rising from the Vatican, signaling the cardinals have elected a new pope that will give leadership to the Roman Catholic Church. We were discussing a number of issues yesterday on that very matter. But, folks, we've got some important issues that are impacting us here across this nation today. It was since the shooting at a gun-free zone at Sandy Hook Elementary School that there's been a concerted effort on both the national level and on the part of many states to institute gun control. Well, here with the latest information is Mike Hammond, who has spent the better part of his career in government service. He's been a legislative counsel to Senators Bob Smith, Gordon Humphrey, Jesse Helms, and Steve Sims. He was a member of the Department of Education Transition Team and the Department of Justice Transition Team, served as general counsel to the United States U.S. Senate Steering Committee, and also serves as a political consultant and writer as well as general counsel for Gun Owners of America. Mike, nice to have you back on Crosstalk today.
Thanks. Hello, Crosstalk.
You know, we're going to take a look at what's happening in a number of individual states in this area of gun control, but if we could first examine what's happening on the national scene. We've seen the position of the president and vice president. We know the legislation that's been introduced, but not a whole lot of talk has been going on. What exactly is that national legislation looking like, and what is its current status?
Okay, without getting too much in the weeds, let me say that within the next probably 4 weeks, history is going to be made here in America. I think one of two things is going to happen. Barack Obama has staked his legacy on being able to, quote, break the back of the gun lobby, close quote. Either he will come out of this as a man who did succeed in breaking our backs and does succeed in moving forward unimpeded with his agenda in a way that's going to transform America, or alternatively, we will teach him the lesson that there are some things, such as our constitutional rights, which transcend even your presidency. So what we are involved in here is historical. Let me say that there are four or five major pieces of legislation we're talking about. Tomorrow, Thursday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is, I'd guess by a 10 to 8 vote, going to vote out the Feinstein gun ban. It would ban most of the semi-automatics in America. We're probably talking about 50% of all long guns currently in circulation and 80% of all handguns. Let me caution your listenership that the Feinstein Amendment isn't going to pass. It may not get a majority in the Senate. It is a red herring. It is a bill that pro-gun state anti-gun Democrats, that is, anti-gun Democrats in pro-gun states, will vote against to pretend that they like the Second Amendment and then vote for other gun control. Second major issue is this universal gun registry, the banning of private sales of firearms in America. And if we go that route, then we will have a national gun registry.
Let me just ask you, Mike, on the we're familiar with Feinstein, but are there multiple bills that have been introduced?
Yes.
Okay.
There are about 4 or 5 which will be moving forward.
Okay.
One will be a vehicle for the votes on the others. But the second vote we're talking about, but take into consideration, the Feinstein bill is a red herring. I mean, if your people are focusing on the Feinstein bill, that's already been defeated effectively, and that's the throwaway vote which the anti-gun Democrats are going to make in order to pretend that they're pro-gun.
We keep hearing the term assault weapons ban. Is that an accurate description?
I don't use that. I actually had a military-style assault weapon when I was in the Army. It was an M16. It was a full automatic firearm. You can't own those in America by and large, unless you get fingerprinted and get a special license. Those are by and large illegal. The notion that a gun, such as an AR-15, which looks sort of like a military rifle, is analogous in any sense to a military rifle, it's just bogus. It's an effort to use fraudulent nomenclature in order to achieve a political end.
Let's talk about this universal background check.
Yeah.
Someone was drafting a letter to the president, and they copied me in on the email. And here's what they said, and I'd like to get your reaction to it.
Okay.
They said the consequence of a background check can be reduced to a simple formula. Examination. Universal background checks leads to registration, local, state, and federal databases, which leads to investigation, bureaucratic decision regarding fitness or need to bear arms, and that leads to confiscation, which leads to tyrannization, the oppression and genocide against a subgroup, whether by its ethnicity, religion, political views, or status, or against the entirety of a state citizen. So they use examination, goes to registration, to investigation, confiscation, and tyrannization,
which leads to extermination. And I was actively involved in rebuilding the Polish Solidarity trade union, which ultimately overthrew communism in the Eastern Bloc. And I can say that both when I talk to these people, they said, the Soviets have all these tanks stationed in our country, and we have nothing. And let me say that 40 years before, in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Nazis, who the first thing they did when they came into power was ban firearms. They exterminated the Jews in Warsaw, and they did so because the government was the only one who was armed. And if you watch documentaries of that period, the people facing mass slaughter and saying, we just, what do? We have no firearms. And so ultimately, registration, confiscation, tyrannization has the real danger of leading to extermination.
So you wouldn't necessarily disagree with that progression that this writer was talking about?
No, I think there's a danger that you go in that direction. Mm-hmm. There have certainly been governments in our lifetime that have engaged in genocide on a very significant scale. And I've been on the radio in a lot of them, in places like Holland, in places like Poland, in places like the old Soviet Union. And I say to these people, if in America we ever reach the point in which you were during our lifetimes, we would like to think that we would be able to defend ourselves.
Monday of this week, the Senate Judiciary Committee had narrowly approved a Democratic bill expanding federal background checks for nearly all gun purchases. Is that the one that you're talking about in the committee?
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
Incidentally, let me say that was approved by a vote of 10 to 8. The radical leftists on the committee, the Democrats, all voted for it, but every single Republican voted against it. Now, what had happened is the Democrats were trying to negotiate with the Republicans in order to sell out on this universal gun registry issue. Thus far, the Republicans have resisted that. I am cautiously optimistic that if this universal gun registry bill ever came to the Senate floor, we would have the votes, that is the 51 votes we need to successfully filibuster it on the Senate floor.
Senator Grassley spoke before the committee, and he warned the Senate Judiciary Committee that despite banning the so-called assault weapons, that mass shootings will continue, criminals will continue to circumvent the law. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think we know what this is all about. New York Congressman Gerald Nadler said after the Newtown shooting that it's important that they, quote, exploit, close quote, the shooting. Julian Epstein, a Democratic strategist on MSNBC, said that it was the goal to, quote, break the back of the gun manufacturers' lobby, close quote. And Ed Rendell, former governor of Pennsylvania, also a liberal anti-gun Democrat, said that they were, quote, lucky, close quote, that so many people had been killed at Newtown because it made it an advantageous political issue. I mean, what sort of political monstrosity thinks that we're lucky that 20 children got murdered so that they could use that murder for political advantage?
Wow, never let a crisis go to waste.
It's quite extraordinary.
On the federal basis, what's important for people to stay plugged into on this matter? Is it important that they stay in touch with their congressmen and senators?
Yes, and at this point, I think the issue, unless a Republican caves in with respect to the universal gun registry, at this point the central issue is going to be a bill called S-54, the Veterans Gun Ban, and that was reported out of committee last Thursday. It was reported out by an 11-7 vote. All the Republicans voted against it except for Chuck Grassley, but Grassley made a statement that he was voting for it as a courtesy, but that he would vote against it unless it were significantly changed before it got to the Senate floor. So we have probably 7.5 Republicans on the committee in opposition to that.
What is a veterans gun ban?
What that would do is it supposedly goes after trafficking. That's like taking a big pile of garbage and putting it in a nice package with a bow on the top. Supposedly goes after trafficking and straw purchases, but trafficking and straw purchases are already illegal under federal law. Those are already illegal, and what are we doing, putting them on super secret probation? Effectively, what it would do is say that if you negligently sell more than one gun, if you negligently give a gun, or if you negligently raffle a gun to someone who turns out to be a veteran who's had his rights taken away, someone who turns out, unbeknownst to you, to be a marijuana smoker, that guy gets a pass, but you go to prison for 15 years. Under that circumstance, why would anyone ever sell a gun, raffle a gun, or give a gun ever again?
Does it seem bizarre to you that here we are talking about taking away guns of Americans while at the same time we're arming Muslim Brotherhood over in Egypt?
Well, it's quite ironic in a whole bunch of ways. Mark Kelly, the wife of Gabby Giffords, who's been a chief advocate of gun control, has just purchased an AR-15, and when he was caught on it, he said, "Oh, I was purchasing it for someone else." That would be a 15-year prison sentence under the Veterans Gun Ban. As a result, we are thinking of renaming the bill the Mark Kelly "Do As I Say, Not As I Do" legislation.
So why did he buy that AR-15?
Supposedly, he said he was going to give it to someone else. That's what he said. Exactly who knows what the objective is, but there's a whole bunch of hypocrisy in a lot of different ways. NBC doesn't very often stumble on the truth, but on the day of Newtown, it had an FBI profiler, Clint Van Sant. He was on over and over again, and he said the mass shooters choose venues which, first of all, there's no police, and the second thing is that they can choose Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio has just been elevated to Pope.
Okay, breaking news here as we speak. Folks, we're going to take a quick 60-second break, and we're going to come back and look at what's happening within the states as it relates to gun control as well. You're listening to Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation scientist and author at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, is the intelligent design movement compatible with biblical creation?
Chris, the intelligent design leaders go to great lengths to deny biblical creation. While some of them personally are Christians, they've chosen a strategy of being completely generic in their teaching, claiming that the design that they see in life is compatible with everything from Hinduism to New Age thinking to Christianity, etc. It's important to recognize that all biblical creationists believe in intelligent design. but they identify the intelligence as the God of the Bible. As long as the ID movement continues to deny Christ's work in creation, to deny the truth of the Bible, I'm convinced that God will never fully honor it. The movement is a non-Christian movement, and that's the way I see it from a back to Genesis perspective.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more information, visit us on the web at icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Mike Hammond is our guest today. He is the General Counsel for Gun Owners of America. Certainly taking a look at what's happening on the national front, but folks, also, it is encroaching upon individual states as well. Mike, let's talk a little bit about the issues of what's happening in the states. Monday of this week, a gun control package pushed by Colorado Democrats has cleared the state Senate there. What do we know about what's happening in Colorado?
Well, Colorado basically has implemented the universal gun registry, which is being considered at the federal level. They're also demanding that gun owners now pay for their own, basically, imprisonment. They pay for the background checks, which they're now going to be required to have. And in addition, they've implemented a magazine ban. It's sort of intriguing because in Colorado, I mean, there have been two over the past 15 years. There have been two tragedies and one near tragedy. The two tragedies we know of. They happened in Columbine, they happened in Aurora, and they both happened in gun-free zones. But interestingly, another gunman went into New Life Church in Colorado Springs for the purpose of shooting up the place and getting his 15 minutes of fame by taking as many people down as possible. He was stopped because an off-duty policewoman in that church had a gun and took him down. Took him down with that firearm. Mm-hmm. So as a result, Colorado Springs didn't become Aurora and didn't become Columbine for one reason and one reason only, and that is there was an individual with a firearm there who was able to combat the killer and keep him from inflicting maximum casualties.
So do the legislators there have blinders on their eyes regarding these situations?
You would think so. As I said, it's become a politicization issue. I think more than an issue of policy. If you look at the central thing which Obama had hoped to get imposed, this universal gun registry, it wouldn't have worked in Newtown because Adam Lanza stole his guns. Wouldn't have worked in Aurora, and wouldn't have worked in Tucson because in both of those cases, the gunmen, Jared Loeffner and James Holmes, had passed a background check. So you're talking about a solution which doesn't deal with the purported problem, but it is being posited for one reason only. I think Barack Obama is ruthless with respect to the pursuit of a political agenda. He understands that having attacked the pro-lifers, having attacked the fiscal conservatives, that the 100 million gun owners in America represent perhaps the single most important pillar of the Republican Party, the single most important obstacle to achieving his entire agenda, and he is out to destroy that pillar. That's what we're talking about. People shouldn't deceive themselves into thinking that this is a case of stopping school violence. If you want to stop school violence, you would allow principals and teachers and staff to defend their students in the case of a horrific tragedy. But this isn't an effort of stopping school violence. It's an effort of achieving a political objective. And
I believe the governor is poised, ready to sign whatever the legislature passing gun control there.
Yeah, Hickenlooper. I mean, but it certainly is a lesson to people in Colorado because I think when the Democratic legislature was elected, and when elected its two Democratic United States senators, the argument was, we're a different type of Democrat. We're not going to seize your guns. We're not going to take away your rights. We're Colorado Democrats. And yet, lo and behold, it turns out that they have the same liberal agenda that the Democratic Party in general has. And that's going to be interesting when we come up to the upcoming elections, because the United States Senate is very much in play. There are 13 Democratic senators in pro-gun states who are up for re-election or who are retiring. There are no, unless you include Maine, no Republicans in anti-gun states who are up. So this whole question of, is it possible to have a conservative pro-gun Democrat, is going to be central to the question of who does or who doesn't control the Senate.
I'd like to move to the state of Florida. I'm looking at a Fox News piece from last week stating that a Florida legislator wants anyone trying to buy ammunition to complete an anger management program first. It would then require a repeat of this course every 10 years. A person would actually have to present a certificate that they have successfully completed an anger management program consisting of at least 2 hours of online or face-to-face instruction in anger management techniques. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Florida there as far as this proposal?
Do you want to know who should take an anger management course? These people, these commentators who appear on television every night and call their opposition crazy 50 times in an hour for the purpose of trying to achieve their gun control objectives. I mean, that it's clear that some of the...
You mean like Piers Morgan and his debate with Larry?
Some of the commentators, like Keith Olbermann, are, I think, literally on drugs. I guess that Chris Matthews is as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if Piers Morgan was. These people get on television every night, scream for an hour, throw epithets for an hour at the people with whom they disagree, and they have the nerve to say that someone else has an anger problem.
Yeah. Are there other states that are moving legislation forward at this time?
Yeah, there are a whole lot of other states. Certainly New York enacted a more or less across-the-board gun control package, banning virtually all guns and making 95% of all guns, basically, at least at the time, being temporarily inoperative because of their 7-round magazine limit. In addition, New York would create a gun registry. And guess what happened as soon as Governor Andrew Cuomo had his gun registry? He turns around and says, okay, now it's time to think about confiscation. This ought to be sobering information to those people who are looking at whether to enact this universal gun registry at federal law or not. In California, as another example, they're considering limiting ammunition. And as a matter of fact, ammunition was initially regulated by the Gun Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, and it's not regulated today because of the McClure-Volkmer Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986, which I managed on the Senate floor for Senator McClure. And so there's an effort to comprehensively regulate ammunition in California. There are other issues. In Washington State, they introduced this gun ban, and make no mistake about it, these gun bans aren't being drafted in Sacramento, Olympia, Providence, and Albany. They're being drafted by Handgun Control in Washington, D.C., and they don't like to be called handgun control anymore, I think for the same reason that Satan doesn't like the word sin. But they are drafting all these pieces of legislation. They're dealing them out to the various state capitals like cards being dealt at a poker table. And in Olympia, Washington, for instance, the chief sponsor of their legislation found out to his chagrin that the bill that he had introduced would allow police to go into everyone's home once a year and inspect their homes, at which point he announced, I guess I should have read my legislation.
Wow. So we're talking New York, California, Washington, Florida, Colorado. These really should perk up the ears of people all across the nation as far as whether or not their state's in the crosshairs.
Yeah, but there are other states which are also enacting good legislation. There are 7 states, at least 7, I think Wyoming certainly is at the forefront of this, which are enacting, and Virginia is also moving legislation, say, we're not going to enforce your gun bans. It's going to be illegal for our state officials to enforce your Obama gun ban should they pass. In Arkansas, they are moving to legalize carrying a firearm in a church in the same way as a firearm in a church in Colorado Springs prevented that church from turning into the scene of a massacre. In other states, such as South Dakota and Oklahoma, they are moving with legislation to allow teachers and principals and staff to carry firearms in the schools for the purpose of protecting their students. So there's very much a red America and a blue America, and the blue America is moving very quickly to take away our Second Amendment rights. Interestingly, they weren't that interested on November the 5th in announcing how anti-gun they were. Yeah. It was just November the 7th that we suddenly learned that they didn't like firearms. But there are also states which are moving for effectual measures to allow students to be protected.
I also noticed that there is a proposal for the city of Nelson, Georgia, where local leaders there would require gun ownership. They have one police officer, patrols 8 hours a day, but leaves the city unprotected for 16 hours overnight. So here we have a community that's looking at requiring their citizens to have a firearm.
Kennesaw, Georgia, already has such a statute, and Nelson is basically taking Kennesaw's statute. But I think they have a good point. I think by and large it's a political point. I haven't heard anyone in Kennesaw being thrown in prison because they didn't have a firearm. But it is a political point that guns sometimes are the only defense you have against lawlessness. I've lived in various places. I've lived in New York City and Greenwich Village, which is where I went to law school. Lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years while I was working for the Senate. And now I live in my little state of New Hampshire most of the year. And there's only one place in my life in which I've ever had someone actually put a gun to my head and begin to pull the trigger. That was in Washington, D.C. That was at a time in which guns were absolutely unlawful in Washington, D.C. But guess what? This kid was perfectly willing to blow my brains out, which was unlawful. So therefore, the fact that his gun was unlawful was really no impediment to him. As a matter of fact, the D.C.'s law saying you don't have a gun, the only thing it did was it told this kid that he could hold a gun to my head, he could blow my brains out, and there was no chance that I, being a law-abiding citizen, would be able to shoot back.
Wow. Early this week, CNSNews.com reported that Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut urging the CEO of NASCAR to not take sides on this gun control debate and asking him to reconsider sponsorship with the National Rifle Association for the upcoming NRA 500 race in Texas. You believe this issue is just being carried too far?
Murphy is sort of an interesting character. First of all, Connecticut, as you probably know, had among the most stiffest gun control in the world prior to the shooting at Newtown, as a result of politicians like Chris Murphy and Senator Blumenthal and the other liberal Democratic politicians in that state. And all the gun control they had didn't stop Newtown. As a matter of fact, what it said to Adam Lanza is, you can kill all these kids, you can get your 15 minutes of fame, you don't have to worry that we're going to allow any principals, staff, or teachers to shoot back at you. These people, in some respects, I think, horrifically, bear some responsibility for what happened in Newtown. And now they're running around saying, if all the states which were safer than us would adopt our gun laws, which didn't work, then it would make us safe. By what conceivable rationale does that make any sense?
Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and just before we open lines, we're going to come back and we're going to be looking at the U.S. government buying up all this ammunition. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk.
Most people devote much time researching and investigating important issues before making a decision or reaching a conclusion. Yet when faced with the most important issue of their earthly life, where will I spend eternity, they appear to be unconcerned or disinterested. Since God does not promise anyone tomorrow, and man's eternal destiny is sealed at death, Would it not be wise to investigate these things? That's the purpose of the book Preparing for Eternity, in which author Mike Gendron contrasts the truth of God's Word with the teachings and traditions he was taught for over 30 years in the Roman Catholic Church. He found that eternal life is not merited by good works, but is given freely by God's grace to those who put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as their all-sufficient Savior. The book, Preparing for Eternity, is available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
Well, you're listening to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network, and certainly much happening during our news even today as Pope Francis I now speaking from the Vatican. And as we again draw your attention to our content yesterday on the program on these issues, today we are speaking with Mike Hammond, who is General Counsel for Gun Owners of America. And Mike, when we were just before the break, we were talking about this NRA 500 race in Texas and somebody calling for them to back out of that. But there was another story that came through this just within the last days that it just appalled me. And this is about a third-grade boy at an elementary school in Michigan, brought 30 cupcakes to school in celebration of his 9th birthday. And, you know, as kids like putting things on top of the cupcakes, well, this boy chose to put on these little green plastic army guys, the ones that kids have played for with decades. When the principal found out about this, she stopped the boy from passing out these treats until all these little plastic army soldiers had been removed, and said that these figures were insensitive in light of the Sandy Hook shooting in Colorado. She called the father, the principal tried to explain her reasoning. He didn't accept the explanation. He said these plastic figures, they represent World War II soldiers, have no relationship to Sandy Hook.
How many soldiers were there at Sandy Hook anyway? I don't remember any of them. Why would that conceivably be relevant to Sandy Hook, except that people who don't like guns also don't like veterans?
Yeah, and that's the very point that was coming out. Soldiers were not responsible for the Newtown massacre. Rather, they risked their lives every day to protect innocent civilians.
Well, this kid is actually reasonably lucky. I have a file of about 10, 11 students who have been suspended, expelled for school because they do things like one kid in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, had a Pop-Tart, which, having eaten out a couple pieces, it began to look sort of like a pistol. So he held up his Pop-Tart and said, "Bang, bang," was suspended for that. And it's sort of intriguing because when I was a kid, and there are very few advantages in life to being very, very, very old, but one of them is you have a little perspective. When I was a kid during the Vietnam War in high school, 14 to 17-year-old kids ended up walking back and forth across the campus, across the playground, up and down the halls, up and down the sidewalks of my ghetto school. Wasn't a rural or suburban school. It was a ghetto school with M1 semi-automatic firearms, fully functional, except they didn't have a firing pin, but you couldn't tell that to look at them. 14-year-old kids walking up and down the hall with semi-automatic rifles. No one thought that we were going to shoot up the school. I graduated in 1967. 1968, they passed the first big gun control law, Gun Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. Now, look, we've gotten 40 years, and we have reached a point in which holding up a Pop-Tart is considered threatening. Yeah. Exactly what has happened to our country that we have become so paranoid, that we have become so gun-hating in cases of the liberal media, and that the liberal media has become so almost racist with respect to people who hold traditional American values.
Let's talk about the federal government here for a bit. bit, buying up ammo. I mean, I've heard from folk who said, we just cannot find ammo and shelves are empty. There was an analysis done by a Forbes contributor showing that the government is buying up 1.6 billion rounds of ammo, enough for more than 100 years of training. What can you tell us about this government buy-up?
I don't know why the government is buying them up. I don't know whether it's an effort to drain the shelves. I do know that the states like California that want to limit your ability to buy ammunition on the grounds that, why should you need more than 100 rounds at a time, are using this argument, but using this argument in the face of people who now don't have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 rounds of ammunition and now can't buy them.
We also have seen reports of the government buying up tanks for Department of Homeland Security.
Well, I know that I can tell you that we had an individual. We invited our members to write into us and tell us your horror stories about what Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is doing in your gun shops. And the reason is because we wanted to demonstrate that if this universal gun registry bill passed, if everyone was required to have a 4473, then the government, which is now going into gun shops and copying all these 4473s, was in fact going to create a national gun registry from that legislation. In fact, one guy told us that this was in fact happening. In addition, he said, he began talking with a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agent who said, we're talking about basically all this talk about the Second Amendment intended as a vehicle for resisting tyranny. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms guy said, if that happens, we're not going to be shooting back with rifles.
Mike Hammond is our guest today. I'd like to open our phone lines to get your questions of our guest. He is General Counsel for the Gun Owners of America. Our toll-free number, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. Do you agree with our guest? Do you disagree? Maybe you want to tell us what's happening in your state on this issue. And how do you feel about these matters here, about the federal government buying up the ammo, about the legislation that's being advanced through the Senate Judiciary Committee at this point? Our number, 800-733-9829. I see the lines are jamming up here immediately.
Oh, surely they all agree with me, right?
Mike, tell us about the website there that represents your organization.
GunOwners.org.
And what will they find there?
They will find all sorts of analysis of all the legislation which is pending. They will find our alerts about what is happening in Congress. They will find studies, testimony, all sorts of useful tools. They'll find, if they want to, the ability to sign up as a member of our organization for a mere $20 a year and let your voice be heard on behalf of the Second Amendment. And
can they sign up will they get email alerts?
Yes, they'll get email. They can sign up for email alerts. Whether or not they give us the $20, they can sign up for email alerts. And whenever anything happens in Congress, we will let them know. Recently, it's been like every day. We've been afraid of exhausting our members because so much was happening. But we're pretty much in the vortex of history. I mean, I'm watching St. Peter's Square now, and they're talking about making history there. But we're also making history. We will either end up with Barack Obama being an FDR-type figure who fundamentally transforms the nature of our country, or he will not be a transformational figure. We will be able to stop at least his anti-gun agenda and to remove that aura of invincibility. One of those two things is going to happen, and whichever happens, the nature of this country is going to be fundamentally different.
Let's begin with Mike calling from Wisconsin. Mike, you're on the air.
Yeah,
hi, Mike.
Jim and Mike. I just wanted to give you a quick story. On February 6th, my wife and I were down doing some ministering work, and somebody kicked a sign apart and was coming after us. And had I not had a firearm and a concealed carry permit, he would have bludgeoned my wife and I both to death.
That's incredible.
And thank God I did not have to shoot the man. He was one step from it and realized that he had a weapon pointed at him. And if they start grabbing guns, there's seven 7 countries here that banned guns, and 56 million people were murdered over it, rounded up and just eliminated. And I just thought I'd share that with you. But I'm sure glad I had my gun on February 6th.
How did that scenario end, Mike?
And I think I would go on to say that in virtually every case of an individual who draws a firearm in order to protect himself and his family, it doesn't result in violence. In the end, it results in a peaceful back-off. My brother lives in a dangerous area of Kansas City, Missouri. Woke up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. with a drug addict standing over his bed. Drew a gun, stood the guy down until police arrived. That ended peacefully, but I'm convinced that had he not been able to back that guy off with a firearm, that my brother might be dead now.
Caller Mike, how did your situation end?
Well, the police, we've gone to the DA with it, and they have an arrest warrant out for him, but his brother is not giving him up. So it's a wait-and-play game now. I mean, that's where it stands right now. So we're still going down to do our ministering work, and we got to keep praying that this guy gets pulled over for something, or some other department in the police department is just going to pick him up on a felony warrant, and then it'll be trial time. So they have his picture. And it was video recorded, so thank God for that as well.
Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Brad calling from West Dallas. You're on the air.
Hi, Brad.
Jim. Great show. Your guest mentioned Obama, and he mentioned the Senate a lot, but I didn't hear him say, unless I missed it, anything about the House of Representatives. What does he have to say about where they stand on all this stuff?
Let me say this. We hope the thing that will move, if it moves, is a veterans gun ban. We hope and pray that we will be able to kill it in the Senate. If we are not able to stop gun control in the Senate, we are currently circulating a letter in the House, being circulated by Congressman Steve Stockman of Texas and Congressman Paul Brown of Georgia. And what that letter says is, it's to Speaker John Boehner. It says we want to invoke the Hastert rule. What that means is we don't want you to bring up any gun control legislation unless it has support from 117 Republicans. We don't want another one of these deals, which we've gotten 3 times this year, in which you bring up legislation for Democrats and a handful of Republicans to outvote your own caucus. Don't bring up gun control unless 117 Republicans support it. If we get a majority of the Republican caucus on that letter, we believe that gun control will be dead in the House. But that's what we're doing in the House right now.
Thanks,
it
Brad.
would seem that the House would be a better stone wall against this stuff than the Senate.
Well, hopefully we have 2 stone walls. I actually played a fairly significant role in working with Solidarity in order to destroy communism in Eastern Europe. And if you look at the Berlin Wall, there was not necessarily just one wall that the West saw, but a couple of walls surrounding the no man's land. And so not that I want to create an analogy between the two, but we're trying to create 2 stone walls. One, to kill anti-gun legislation in the Senate. Secondly, to block it if it gets through in the House as well.
Very good.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
To Racine and Lat, you're on the air.
Yeah, hey, Jim. I just want to let your hosts know we keep talking in America about banning guns and all this stuff. I don't know if he knows this, but center fire big magnum loads, primers have been banned. What's not to say that Obama will ban primers or only make ammunition there's primers that only have a shelf life of 6 months. So if you can't buy ammunition, you can own all the guns you want, but there's nothing in the Second Amendment that says anything about banning ammunition. Then we're dead in the water in this country.
Mike?
Well, I can tell you that there are efforts to effectively ban ammunition, and I hear the music.
Let's take a quick break. We'll comment further on that following the break. Thank you for the call here, Lat. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. We're continuing our series on money and a biblical worldview. Number 1 of 20 principles. Godliness plus contentment equals great gain. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 speaks to this. Godliness plus contentment equals great gain. You know, as we see the debasement of the American dollar, meaning as they print more money and it devalues the dollars you hold, and therefore it takes more dollars to buy things, a lot of folks are going to have to do without. And will they be able to be happy without their things? Well, the Bible says that if you have godliness and then you combine that with contentment, that's really what is great gain. Number 2, we cannot take money out of this world, but we can store up treasures in heaven. 1 Timothy 6, verse 7 speaks to this, as well as Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. So are we investing in heaven where the thieves don't break in and steal and where moth and rust does not corrupt? We want to have a biblical worldview for money? Let's go to the Bible.
You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network. Mike Hammond is with us today, General Counsel for Gun Owners of America. And, gun rights are under attack. The caller just before the break brought up the issue of ammunition. And what about if the government just gives a short shelf life to matters of ammunition or make some other rules pertaining to it, some laws or executive orders? Are we going to see just as big?
I'll try to be succinct because I know there are much of calls online. Let me say that the big thing to worry about here is what's called the armor-piercing bullet renewal. Currently, when it was first enacted in the late 80s, it had a metallic standard. You couldn't have a bullet made of tungsten. What the anti-gunners are trying to achieve is an armor-piercing bullet ban, which allows the Department of Justice to shoot an undetermined number of rounds out of an undetermined gun from an undetermined distance at an undetermined type of body armor for an undetermined number of times. And if after 2 million times one shot penetrates that body armor, they can ban that. So be very careful about that.
Okay, to the state of Ohio. Trish, thanks for your patience here on the air.
Thank you. I'm totally in agreement with being anti-gun law, and I want to give a practical reason. I live in a very rural area, and we went through, we have a sheriff's department that is so understaffed that they have admitted that they can't get to us in the outer county for at least 45 minutes, probably an hour, sometimes more. That leaves us on our own, and it really became apparent this fall when we didn't know that from spring until fall, what we weren't hearing from the sheriff's department is that a lot of people in the outer county were being preyed on by heroin addicts coming in from other counties, and they know that the sheriff's department can't get to us, and so it became such high proportion of homes that were being broken into and the windows being crowbarred and stuff during the day that we finally all started hearing about it. We put together a watch group, and we insisted that the sheriff's department come and talk with us and not just give us the normal, security measures, light up your house and things like that. This was happening during the day. And, people walked in. A woman walked in with her kids from school. One of them was 9, and they were in there. A man went to his basement office, and he was working in his office, and his wife left the house to go do errands. And he was still in his pajamas, and he heard somebody come in, and he thought it was her. He went upstairs to talk to her, and they were in there. And the sheriff's department said, during that initial meeting, if someone knocks on your door, you better go and answer, because if you don't, they're coming in. Well, I would like to know what anti-gun people would have us do. Many of us are Christians, solid, born-again believers, and we don't want to hurt anyone. So what would we do? Defend our children with our pitchforks? That is a practical reason. So now we have a good watch group. We're very against vigilantism, but we have to help each other in my area. So we have a call tree, and we have different methods of letting.
We're about out of time. Let me have my comment, if I could.
Well, thank you, Trish. I can't really improve on that testimony. I also come from a small town that doesn't have any police at all between about 11 at night and 8 in the morning. So thank you for that testimony.
And so things like the castle doctrine and having that firearm in the home would give that protection for her.
If you can't protect yourself, you go unprotected.
Let's go to Port Huron, Michigan. Harry, you're on the air.
Yes, question for you, Mike.
Hi, Harry.
You mentioned about the Aurora, that he passed a background check. What is the difference between the current background check and the proposed universal background checks? Is there a difference between the two?
Yes, the proposed background check, it's interesting because there's a lot of fraudulent polling going on in this, would say that you can't have a gun in America, either from a gun dealer. Mm-hmm. Currently, if you get a gun from a gun dealer, you have to be checked out,
right.
or from your next-door neighbor without getting the government's permission to have that gun.
Mm-hmm. Is there a difference, though, in the background itself, the background check? Would it have, this new one, would it have made a difference, or is it the same thing that they look for as in the current background check?
Well, theoretically, it's the same thing. I'd guess that when they all of a sudden have everyone in their system, that they're going to be a lot more choosy in terms of currently about 8% of the people who go through the background check have their guns illegitimately denied. I mean, they should have their purchase approved, but in fact they get a yellow. That is, we're not taking a position on this. In most parts of the country, that means you can't buy the gun. I'd guess that 8% will go up significantly if the background check is expanded in the way that BATF advocates. Not because the law says so, but because with BATF getting what they want, they're going to be a lot more intransigent.
Thanks, Harry. To Al in Milwaukee, you're on the air.
Hi, I just want to make a quick comment about that Sandy Hook massacre. I read on a blog post, Sherry questioning all that Adam Lanza died the day before that massacre happened, and she verified that with the Social Security Administration. I mean, all the records are there. You know, she's got links on her blog post. So I just want to make the comment because that kid was not militarily trained, and how could he kill that many people that accurately? You know, none of this has been coming out in the media.
Mike, any comment on that?
I tend to think it was Adam Lanza. The answer is when you're standing in that school, no one else has a gun but you, and you have an unlimited amount of time to keep pulling the trigger until the police arrive. Yeah, you don't have to be militarily trained in order to kill a lot of people.
And very quickly, you have a few seconds. Caller from Illinois, you're on the air.
Yeah, is that me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Mike, great show. You should come back tomorrow.
Oh, thanks. I need that validation.
Hey,
I'm competing with the Pope
in Illinois. Bought a gun. This is probably 20 years ago. It expired when I was up in Wisconsin working on a power plant. I moved back to Illinois now.
Okay, we only have seconds left here. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm getting to it. Do I have to do I have to redo my FOID card? Or will I be breaking the law?
Is it expired?
Yes.
You have to redo it.
Thank you for the call here, Mike Hammond. We appreciate you being with us here today on Crosstalk. Again, the website?
The website, gunowners.org.
Great. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Bye-bye now. Mike Hammond was our guest here today on Crosstalk, and the attack on gun rights continues. Gunowners.org is the website. Thanks for being with us.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.